excited about this. And because they are able to capture data, which helps them pinpoint the exact amount of subsidy to be passed to the customer. And later on, now he has MOUs with Punjab government, with Haryana government, etc., and gets orders to the tune of about 25-30,000 such pieces. More than the hardware, the platform that he has created is what is really keeping him in business. And now, very smartly, what happens is because the government captures data through his platform, automatically the government indirectly promotes his hardware also, and automatically these large players like Jain Irrigation, etc., get sidelined from that entire distribution wholesale supply chain, distribution channels, and the government kind of hints that this is the hardware to pick up from. Automatically his hardware also gets sold, and his platform actually is becoming more and more powerful. Later on in 2017, the government came up with crop insurance policies also. So for giving out crop insurance, government wanted data about soil quality, moisture content, etc., etc., etc. So this guy, because he controlled the platform, he did not have those soil sensors and moisture sensors, etc., in his portfolio, but he tied up very smartly with a lot of these hardware manufacturers and now captures a lot of data which goes to the government, which is very useful for the government. Hardware sales now are a minuscule percentage of his revenue. His major revenue is coming from the cloud platform, from the data that he's capturing. So once again, a classic example of thinking in terms of platforms. Entered a niche with that product, kept on exploring what other needs do his customer segments have, and then collaborated with other players and has actually controlled the platform. So look, again, the guy started with a hardware and has moved to a platform, a classic shift in the business model, and has completely disrupted that specific segment, has actually made the incumbents run for their money with a smart business model. So control the platform by, maybe you start by entering a niche, I'm repeating myself here, explore needs of that niche, and then see whom you can collaborate with. But at all times, you control the platform. That means entry to that specific customer segment happens only through you, and that's the way forward. You control the hardware to a limited extent. A lot of hardware comes in from collaborators. You provide them the platform gateway to various customer segments. Let us look at one more kind of example. So some of you may have heard of this company called Duolingo. Duolingo is actually a very simple language learning app, which which helps us learn various foreign languages. It's available on the Google Store, Google Play Store, as well as the App Store. So if one wants to learn a new language, one can download that and start learning the language through it. And so it's like a tutorial through an app, but it's a very interestingly gamified, animated kind of a tutorial, which is it's a lot of fun to use and very interactive, interesting to use, and it captures a lot of attention of anybody who wants to learn a language. Now, the real business model behind this is very interesting. This Duolingo is actually a translation company. What it does is it takes translation jobs from large corporates. Say, for example, if maybe a Japanese company wants to enter into India, it obviously wants its product manuals, instruction manuals, etc., to be translated into various Indian languages. Now, what happens? Suppose I am Duolingo, and there is this Japanese company who comes to me for this translation job. When I get the job, what I do is I cut down this document into small little words, small little bits and pieces, sentences, paragraphs, etc., and create nice little animation around it and push it down through the Google Play Store or the App Store, where hundreds of thousands of people who want to learn the Japanese language keep on playing, keep on doing this tutorial. Doing this tutorial means actually indirectly they are actually doing the translation of this document piece by piece, bit by bit. And I, as Duolingo, have an intelligent algorithm which picks up the best translation from these hundreds of thousands of people wanting to learn Japanese and indirectly doing the translation in various languages. I have an intelligent algorithm which picks up the best translation, stitches the document together, and voila, I give it to my customer in the first place, who's the Japanese company. So the Japanese company is paying me for the translation. The people who want to learn the language, it's a freemium model. The app is a freemium model, which means the first 7 8 rounds, 7 8 levels are free. After the first 7 8 levels, I start monetizing the presence of the learners in my app through either direct subscription payments or through in-app videos and in-app advertisements. So basically, Duolingo is in the middle. I am getting paid from both ends of the value chain. That means that Japanese customer is also paying me, and my translators, so to say, the people who want to learn the language also start paying me after a certain level, which means a smart way to construct a business model. Here, what has this Duolingo done? They have created communities of like-minded people, people who want to learn different languages and who are passionate about it, and they're actually crowdsourcing a lot of their work from them, being able to do it at a much lower cost than employing translators and doing it. So this is what I call as double whammy. But in essence, it is a platform where a lot of communities of people, passionate people, have been created, and a lot of that job is being crowdsourced from the front end and at the back end. And this Duolingo is able to deliver the jobs at a much competitive rates than compared to anybody else. So how can one create communities, and how can one once you create these communities of passionate people, crowdsourcing of a lot of skills doesn't remain too difficult. So think about how that can be applied and disruptions can be brought in. One more point I'm going to make before I stop and we start taking questions. uh, Creating platforms, another trait here is going beyond the obvious customer. I'll narrate one more project that I'm working on right now. I won't name the company because it's under a wraps, under a NDA, but this is a large conglomerate or engineering conglomerate and into diversified businesses. Now they are into finance, they are into logistics, X, Y, Z. You name it, and they are there in that business. But started off as a automobile thing. All right. So these guys have one stamping division. Stampings are, those stampings are the ones that in a motor, in an electric motor, the rotor and the stator is kind of comprised of sheet metal pieces kind of bound together. Those are the sheet metal pieces that I'm talking about are the stampings. They have a stampings division, which churns out these stampings which are sold to motor manufacturers, etc. So their major customers used to be air conditioning manufacturers, coolers, etc., motor manufacturers who supply to these guys. And their business was very seasonal, still is seasonal, because all these products, all these motors, etc., get consumed according to the climatic conditions. The air conditioners sell more in the summer, so March to May is high season for them, etc., etc., etc. And their capacity utilization over the year is not quite uniform. It fluctuates a lot. So they wanted to kind of ensure that there is a constant flow of business throughout the year. So we started by looking at some other customer segments which would kind of keep their factories active, installed capacities active at the time, throughout the year. So we were looking out, and one customer segment which came about was these handheld appliances which people use in the kitchen, like handy mixies and things like that, manufactured by Surya Morphy Richards or say Bajaj Electricals, or those kind of companies. And they were talking to the procurement guys of these companies, and They kind of cracked the deal. Okay, this next season onwards, we are going to buy from you, etc., etc., etc. But this team from the original client of mine that I'm talking about, those people did not just restrict themselves to talking to the procurement management of or purchase management of Bajaj Electricals or Surya Murphy Richards. They also wanted to understand the whole mechanics or the functioning of that company. So they had casual conversations with their marketing folks and sales folks and servicing folks, etc. And during these discussions, a very significant problem came up, which was that uh, the salespeople of these hand appliance manufacturers have a lot of problems servicing complaints from end users, from customers. Because once it breaks down, then suddenly there is a call to the service center. Service center people are not available. Then the customer keeps on shouting, goes on social media, and does a lot of bad mouthing about the company, etc. It's a big issue they were facing. Now, with this, this team came back to the drawing board along with their development folks, etc., sat back and actually then came up with an idea that we can manufacture motors along with IoT sensors embedded into the motor, which keeps on checking the health of the entire appliance. So once this motor gets fitted into the uh, hand appliances of Surya Morphy Richards or Bajaj Electricals, etc., the actual data of performance gets captured on their cloud. So they are manufacturing the motor and developing the cloud to capture actual performance data from the end user's side. That means that hand mixer or whatever the device is, wherever it is being used in the kitchen, the devices, it is a connected device, it captures information about the working condition of that appliance, gets fed into the platform, and the servicing folks of these Bajaj Electricals or Surya Morphy Richards or any of these hand appliance manufacturers get real-time information, and they get predictive analytics about this particular exact piece which is going to which is getting faulty, which needs a service, etc. So they can preempt, they themselves get in touch with that customer and say, you need a servicing here, you need a servicing there, rather than wait for the last minute customer becoming completely without that equipment and very unhappy. This is a predictive kind of a model coming in. Now look at where this company started from. Absolute the lowest end of manufacturing in this motor business, the stamping manufacturer, and see where they would go when they have this all this model in place. Once again, uh, creating a platform, they have created a platform to capture all this information and be able to enhance the performance of their motor, as well as give an additional service to their client, which means these guys have gone from a manufacturer to an end-to-end service provider. Now, once again, through the platform route. So creating platforms and is going to remain a kind of a disruptive force in the days to come. So think about how one can make that happen, and in your businesses, try to bring in this kind of platform thinking, which for which you really need to relook at the business models that we are operating in. And for that, if you can look at this Venn diagram, any solution must satisfy user needs. It has to take care of the technological possibilities, and finally it has to take care of the business goals. Now, if you look at the wristband manufacturers in the first example which I talked about, these guys captured the user needs very well, figured out the technological possibilities to make that product very well. But with their initial model of trying to manufacture it, their business goals would not have been satisfied. So they kept on thinking and thinking till they arrived at this sweet spot. With the clouds platform model, they could take care of the user needs, the technological possibilities, as well as the business goals. So as an entrepreneur, we must always strive to reach this sweet spot. Until that time, we need to really tweak. And when one reaches there, there is a possibility of, along the way, how can you really uh, change the way that industry works through thinking of various ways in which one reaches the customer, etc. So remember this. This is a very simple thing that one needs to strive at. Now I will talk about a little bit about how can we reach there. Some simple questions that one needs to ask to be able to kind of create some disruptive business models. A small little framework of 6 questions that one needs to ask oneself at all times. Uh, how do we reach the customer? Now look at how the first wristband fellows, how did they reach the customer? Initially, they were thinking of going directly to customers by manufacturing the wristband. But they figured out a much more effective way to reach the same customer segment through their cloud platform and through the appliance manufacturers, because the appliance manufacturers got a very high value proposition that their appliances could then be labeled as deaf and mute friendly, which was a big thing way back in 2014 or so. So they reach the same set of customers, but in a completely different manner. And that called for a different business model. It was kind of a API based, per API based kind of a revenue model, as against selling a wristband and taking the money. So, which this particular model gave them access to the global market, whichever market that the appliance manufacturers were playing in, they had access to that market as well. Again, look at the second example, which I talked about, my student with the Smart Kheti application, reached the same customer, but initially he was trying in vain, trying to reach to the same wholesaler, distributor, retailer kind of model, which was totally controlled by the big players. This guy bypassed it all, created that platform, made the government one of his major customers and one of his major affiliates, through which he was able to sell back to the same kind of hardware to the same customer segment, that is farmers, but in a different manner. So he rejigged this business model and has disrupted that space, and large companies have kind of got a shock in that space. Second question one can ask is, how do we optimize our operations? How do we optimize our operations? Same case now in the case of this wristband fellows. Manufacturing would have been such a difficult thing for these two young fellows. How did they optimize the whole operation? They did something completely different from what a conventional business would have done. Creating software is much less capital intensive rather than setting up a manufacturing unit. So there are different ways in which one can optimize operations. Third question, how do we source our manpower? Now look at Duolingo. How are they sourcing their manpower? They are sourcing manpower by creating a community and crowdsourcing that skill from that manpower. So there are different ways in which each of these questions can be answered, and the different ways in which you get the answers, those are possible avenues for disruption. How do we source our inputs? So let's take the example of Uber. One of the main inputs is vehicles. Now, because of the entirely freelancing model of Uber, the inputs come completely free into the Uber platform, and they are able to access infinite amount of input at practically zero cost, actual zero cost, because all the inventory or all the inputs come from freelancers. Now, to be able to make that happen, this particular thing, what is the kind of tie-up that a company like Uber has with the drivers or the cabbies? It's a completely open tie-up, which means that even if you are logged in on the Uber app, the driver or the cabbie can switch off and go on to the Ola app at his or her discretion. There is no binding agreement. So So those kinds of, what are the kinds of tie-ups that one needs to seek in different ways. By seeking different types, also you can disrupt existing business models. And how do we create an optimal product mix? Once again, coming back to the smart kheti example, this boy constantly kept on analyzing what else does my existing customer need, and kept on asking the question, can I satisfy those needs? If I can, I will. But if I cannot, can I collaborate with relevant partners and be able to satisfy those other needs, creating an optimal product mix for my platform? Which means when you create an optimal product mix for the platform, for that specific customer segment, that customer segment always stays with you because almost all of its needs get taken care of, though not by the original startup, but by a collaboration of startups or a collaboration of companies. But that original founder kind of controls the gateway to that, or the platform or entry to that specific customer segment. And so my point is, one should keep on asking these questions and try to see what are different ways in which I can answer these questions. Is there only one conventional way to reach a customer? Is there only one conventional way to optimize operations? Is there only one conventional way to access manpower, and so on? I'm sure if you constantly keep on asking these questions, you will find different ways, different answers to each of these. And that's where the genesis of disruption really sets in, especially for business models. With this, I would stop talking and we can take some questions or we can have a discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Kaustubh. I think it's very interesting the way you summarized it into the 5 hows and the 1 what, which sort of essentially the crux of the whole thing comes there. I had one question. These days we are hearing a lot about design thinking. How would you differentiate design thinking with business disruption concepts?
Well, design thinking is a mindset. It's a problem-solving approach which keeps the user at the center at all times, and keeps on. It's a kind of an exploratory, iterative approach which keeps the user at the center at all times. That means a person trying to, or a company trying to solve a problem, understands the problem not from their own perspective but from the user's perspective. Many times the problem gets redefined because the user is thinking differently and we are thinking differently. So that's one first jolt that the company gets. And then after that, after having redefined the problem from the user's perspective, a typical design thinking approach is keeping the user in the loop even while you're ideating for the solution. Taking feedback constantly, creating a prototype, testing the prototype from the consumers, taking a feedback, and that iteration keeps on going on. Now, in disruption also will happen only when we are really in touch with the customer, their needs, their, so to say, latent or unarticulated needs, which haven't been voiced, but they exist, they are there. Like for example, in that wristband example which we talked about, if we probably had not spent time in the customer's context, I don't think we would have got those very simple insights into what the real problems are. And there itself came the genesis of the product. And then how about the ecosystem, how the business model that they were thinking of would not have sustained, and then how they actually created a sustainable business model. So I feel design thinking is the crux of problem solving. And what really differentiates design thinking from other problem solving approaches is that, because every problem solving approach is definitely trying to create a breakthrough. But in design thinking, there is this, uncompromising focus on the user. That empathy quotient, so to say, is, according to me, the building block of design thinking. Later on, ideation, prototyping, testing, etc., I think every problem-solving approach propagates that. But the uncompromising focus on the user is what really differentiates, and that is the genesis of any disruption, I think.
I noticed that you are also consulting to people like Mercedes and Daimler. Now, they for over the years, maybe a couple of decades, have probably set certain benchmarks and standards in their whole operational systems. Where does a disruption concept come in there?
Well, for these companies, the disruption concept has come from outside. Tesla, Elon Musk has totally disrupted them. So somewhere I think success leads to complacency, and they feel that we are doing the right thing. We have so much market share. We command so much of stuff, and customers will pick up anything that we sell. Classic example is Nokia. What happened to them? I mean, they got completely wiped out first by BlackBerry, then by Apple and Samsung. So somewhere I think all these companies, everybody is realizing that we need to really be in touch with the consumer. We really need to be listening to the consumer very, very genuinely. And they are figuring out, or they are setting up protocols and systems to be in constantly touch with the user. In fact, some of the Chinese companies like Haier, etc., HAIER, they have a protocol that every single day, every single employee must spend at least half an hour with end consumers, either online through digital platforms or physically interacting with customers. I think those are the things that every company will have to bring in into their systems and frameworks, protocols or so, to be able to make that happen.
It's interesting. I think the whole world is changing at such a fast pace. The concept of disruption and design thinking comes more into play in these kind of scenarios.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
Gentlemen, we have plenty of time. And incidentally, Kaustubh, we have kept an opportunity open for the participants to ask questions in the networking lounge also. I'd appreciate if you could spend a few minutes after this so that in case anybody wants to interact with you directly on the lounge, they could do that. If there are any more questions, we could take that. Hello. Sure, the topic is quite simple, yet it can create a lot of thoughts in one's mind as to how you're going to apply it to your kind of business. So please feel free to ask whatever you want to clarify. You're not going to get him otherwise. You'll have to pay a big fat fee. But he's right now available for you to at least bounce off a few thoughts and ideas to him.
So probably we'll wait for a few minutes for people to pose the questions.
Yeah. When you talk of design thinking, has there been any classic example recently of design thinking having really made a difference in the end product or the benefits to the consumer? Some immediately in the last recent.
Yeah, I can kind of talk about from my experience, from my consulting practice. 3 years back, 2.5 years back, one a very conventional BPO, telecalling BPO came with a typical, very common kind of query or challenge, saying that over the previous say 10 years, they had been on a digital transformation journey. They have improved the efficiencies of various product services, etc., of their efficiencies of their services, the processes of the backend, etc. And still they were not quite happy. So we said, let us explore the service, the process that is most inefficient. So they said the most inefficient process is the telecalling process, because they keep on calling us, pestering us, customers. Do you want a credit card? Do you want a home loan? Do you want this? Do you want that? And despite us saying no, they keep on pestering us. Now these people, so we picked up that process as the one that needs to be explored the first. So we started this entire discussion, and we started with a kind of a brainstorming workshop. And in that, I insisted that let us include the lowest person in the hierarchy also, the telecaller, who actually picks up a receiver and speaks to the prospect. Let us not ignore that person's input. So we brought them in also. And during the brainstorm, one of the telecalling BPOs, the telecalling executives, the lowest in the hierarchy, so to say, uh, mentioned a very casual statement that all these statistical techniques, Six Sigma, XYZ that we've been practicing is fine. But when I pick up the receiver and speak to the end user, from the voice tone that I get from the prospect on the other side of the line, I kind of get a feeling whether this call is going to get converted or not, or whether this prospect is inclined to buy from us or not. Now, this was a very subjective kind of judgment coming in from that telecaller. And immediately the entire team, right from senior management to the techies, solution architects, etc., jumped on this fellow saying that you are talking about a very subjective kind of a parameter. And threw some numbers at him saying that we have close to about 3,500 telecallers making 40 to 60 calls per 8-hour shift, which means we have something like 175,000 to 200,000 calls which are being made in an 8-hour shift. And if we were to take into account the subjective judgment of each of these calls, it would be impossible for us to operate at scale. Justified. Impossible to operate at scale. But credit to that team, they didn't really give up. And then when they, when we probed further, the techies in the team said that, what are you talking about? You are talking about capturing the voice tone and interpreting the voice tone, right? So basically a voice tone is a sound wave. A sound wave has amplitude, has wavelength, and has frequency. And these three can be perfectly measurable. And we can find patterns in that, provided we have a large enough data set. Then the question was, do we have a data set large enough? If you can kind of recollect, when these telecallers call us, before they get connected, there is a question. This call may be recorded for training and quality purposes, right?
Correct.
So that was ringing in my head. And I asked them the question, do you have these call logs recorded? Then quickly that senior VP in the brainstorming session sent somebody out. And in 2 minutes, that person came back saying that we have 4.5 million call logs recorded over the previous 12 years of our operations. That's a huge data set that we are sitting on. Then the next question was, do you have the outcomes of these call logs also recorded? That means this prospect took 20 calls to get converted. This one took 8 calls to convert it. This one took 10 calls to get converted. So they said, yes, more or less we have that data. Now they were sitting on these 4.5 of million or 45 lakh call logs with documented output. Then it was just a question of pattern mapping between the two, for which they had to really understand, they had to quantify the voice tones of each of these 4.5 million call logs, for which they did not have technology, in-house technology. Then we looked around and we found one startup from some of the incubators that I've been connected with, doing some cool stuff in speech recognition technology. And these people got together, and in the next 7.5 months, the startup actually created a back-end speech recognition engine, which could kind of, depending on it was a machine learning algorithm created with the voice tone on one side, which quantified voice tone on one side, and the outcomes which had been got by these 4.5 million call logs. And what emerged was the voice tones fell into 5 categories. Voice tone pattern A corresponds to an outright conversion by the prospect. Voice tone pattern B corresponds to a maybe yes by the prospect. Voice tone pattern C is a yes, no, maybe by the prospect. Voice tone pattern D is maybe no by the prospect, and voice tone pattern E is an outright no from the prospect. Now, it is a self-learning algorithm which they created 2.5 years back. And today, I mean, just before the lockdown, about somewhere in February, I had touched base with them to find out how they were doing. And that algorithm has become so intelligent now that whenever a telecaller calls a prospect, within the first 12 words that the prospect utters, the backend sounds speech recognition engine kind of understands the tone in which that person is speaking and buckets the prospect into some of these 5 baskets, voice tone pattern A, B, C, D, or E. And depending on which voice tone pattern the prospect falls in, the rest of the question flow or the conversation flow appears on the telecaller screen in front, speeding up or making that fellow's job so much simpler and leading to targeted marketing, leading to a lot of savings in their promotional effort, in their marketing effort, in their manpower, all of that. Now, here, this is what I say that, the empathy quotient, or say the qualitative parameter which got picked up in the beginning, which was being discounted earlier because of all these statistical techniques, the voice tone pattern, which was completely discounted at the cost of scale, was also quantified with the right use of technology. So that's what I would say is the kind of, the beauty of design thinking, where you don't let go of that real, what do you say, last mile user connect, as well as the qualitative feeling that one captures from the customer, and then technology comes in later. So I firmly believe in the approach of user first, tech later. Most of us try to, solve problems with the technology in mind to begin with, and then we try to force fit some solutions there. But I think it should be user first always and tech later.
That's interesting. It's not really a question of what you say, but it's a question of how you say it when you respond to a telephone call.
Yeah.
So by this process, you mean they have been eliminating potential target audience who may never be their customer.
Yes.
So they're focusing more on the thing.
Yes. And what happens, in pattern D and pattern E, who are going to say no, those don't get dead to the system. Those are given to another sales channel to reach out to those customers in a more efficient way. Till then, they were just going on pestering these people irrespective of whether yes, no. And it's such a waste of time, effort. This is much more targeted.
We have a lot of startups in our Thai whole ecosystem. And normally founders are very possessive about their own concepts and ideas and the way to reach the market. What would you advise these startups from the point of view, even assuming they have got into the market, they've got a reasonable traction on the whole thing? At what stage would you say that you need to start thinking for a plan B or a plan C or a disruption to the whole thing so that they can be prepared for an eventuality?
Well, I can't say that this is the right time for a disruption or something like that. But if we are in real close connect with the end user, I think we get enough hints that a disruption is necessary. When the customers are unhappy with existing stuff, or you have figured out a very different way of reaching out to the same customer segment, of maybe optimizing your operation. So any of these 6 questions need to be asked at all times, and you can disrupt the market by answering any one question differently. It's not that all questions need to be answered simultaneously. You could figure out a very different way to reach the customer. You could figure out a very different way to optimize your operations. You could figure out a very different way to source your manpower. So somewhere along the line, if you keep on asking these questions, one will, and then of course you have to think about, does the market really need it or not? and for which one has to be really in touch with that end user at all times. And generally for startups, what I would recommend is that the initial set of users that you have, uh, that who have been with you while you were alpha testing, beta testing, etc., keep those folks very satisfied throughout, because those are the ones who are going to let you experiment with, and those are the ones who know that you are transparent with them, and those are the ones who probably will be great word of mouth publicity for startups. I think keeping that set of users who have been with you during the experimentation phase, connected with you and happy, is what I am talking about. And those are the kinds of people who will form those communities which I was talking about when you think of platforms. Those are the ones who are the real PR folks for the companies. Crowdsourcing, all of that happens from there.
So this kind of brainstorming should probably happen with every review meeting of theirs. Every quarterly review meeting should probably have these kind of brainstorming sessions also, for them to start thinking differently.
Yes, absolutely. And even amongst our, even amongst the TIE network, when we are also mentoring these startups, for the last 2 odd years, what I have started is that normally earlier, only the founder or the co-founder used to come in these mentoring meetings. But I've been trying to push the fact that please get all your senior folks of not just the founding team, but some key employees of yours also in these mentoring sessions, because when we talk about these mindset shifts, many a time, if the discussion happens only with the founder, he or she is not able to translate the same kind of thinking into his team. So that's something which we've been experimenting with, and I think it is showing some good results, because that mindset, unless that organizational mindset shifts, things don't move fast enough.
Anybody else with more questions? You could. We haven't received anything else enough. You could spend a little time in the network lounge, so that in case somebody wants to interact with you on that, we'd appreciate your time on that. We still have another 15-20 minutes.
Yeah. Okay, so what do I do? Should I log off from here?
I think you can take off your screen share.
Okay.
Nirmal? How does he go to network lounge?
It's in the same below menu, sir. In the networking lounge, there's a tab separately for it. Probably he could do after the session, sir. After the session ends. The questions have been posted in the chat box. You can probably take some of them.
I did.
Yeah, okay, great.
I've basically covered most of what they've asked. So we are ahead of time. So thank you, Dr. Kaustubh, for your time. We appreciate your sharing your thoughts with us. And I know this is going to be the 20th, with 2020 ending on a total disruption of our lives. 21 onwards, I hope this is going to be a more positive change. But yet, I think now people have begun to realize that you need to expect the unexpected. And be prepared, whether it's your business, your family, your societal life, everything is now is based on pre-COVID and post-COVID scenarios. I think this concept of disruptive business model thinking and design thinking will make a lot of difference to young startups when they start, because they now need to know that they have to prepare for the eventualities of a kind of tsunami coming in on them at any point of time. So thank you so much. We appreciate your time and efforts. And please do spend a little time with the youngsters who may want to chat with you. Thank you so much.